Okay, so we're just about ready to begin the fourth book of the Torah, the book of what's called in English the book of Numbers. In Hebrew, as we will see, it has at least two names, but we can also call it Bamidbar, in the desert or in the wilderness, and a new book, a new beginning. So what does this book cover? So this book covers a period of time of approximately 38 years. Where are we in the story right now? So at this point in the story, the Jewish people are still camped at Mount Sinai. The Jewish people left Egypt, and about 6 weeks after they left Egypt, they reached Mount Sinai. And in Mount Sinai, then they got the Torah a week later, 7 weeks after they left Egypt. But then they stayed at Sinai for almost a full year. And the fourth book describes how they leave Sinai, they journey away from Sinai. And the third book covers the episodes of the next 38 years until they cross the entire desert. And they get, at the end of the fourth book, they get to what they call the plains of Moab, opposite, next to the Jordan River, opposite Jericho. They're at the border of the land of Israel. So the book is going to cover 38 years from when they left Sinai until they reach, like I said, the destination of the land of Israel. They didn't cross into Israel yet, but that's really the conclusion of the 5 books of Moses, of the stories. Deuteronomy, the 5th book, is Moshe repeating the laws and the history, but the plot does not continue until you get to the next book of the Bible, the book of Joshua, which describes how they cross the Jordan and they begin the conquest of the land of Israel. So that's just a period. So that's just to give a time frame of when this book is covering. Now, most of the episodes of this book are in the beginning, as soon as they start traveling, because very soon they'll hit the story of the spies. And that was when it was decreed that they should be in the desert for 40 years. And then a lot of the episodes are the end of that period. Once they get very close, last 6 months of the 38th year, or call it the 39th year, depending if you're counting from the Exodus. But the bottom line is there's almost 38 years in between that there are no stories. So that's just to give us a little bit about what the theme of the book, what the book covers. And because of that, the book begins with organization. So it begins with a census, and a detailed census of each of the 12 tribes, and then a total of all the various tribes. And then more interesting, it gets to the description of how the tribes would journey through the desert. In other words, we had the temple in the center, and you had 4 camps of 3 tribes apiece, and every tribe would have their own flag and how they organized, and that's how they organized when they camped, as well as when they journeyed. So it's fair to say that this portion is really the first portion of the book of Numbers is really the introduction that allows, I should say, the preparation that would allow for the Jewish people to continue and travel through the desert. So it's the preparation. So a lot of this parsha is very technical. Numbers, camps, divisions, and there's different censuses. There's a census for the Jewish people. There's a census for the Levites. There's actually 2 censuses for the Levites. Once from they're 30 days old, and another one when they're prepared to do the work in the temple. So there's a lot of numbers and organization. So I say, why is this interesting? Well, it's interesting because if you ever try to pack and travel, before you're going to travel, you have to count how many suitcases do I have? How much does each suitcase weigh? What am I taking for the journey? So the act of preparing for the journey does take a certain amount of organization, and that organization takes place within this parsha, the first portion of the 4th book. Now, it happens to be, in addition to the technicalities of this book, there's tremendous amount of spiritual significance and psychological significance. But to do that, you have to go a little deeper, you have to peer a little deeper and open up the commentators throughout the ages, certainly the Kabbalistic and Hasidic commentators. And then we see that a lot of the things that seem just technical to help the Jewish people travel through the desert is also gives us insight in how we should travel through the wilderness of our life, the challenges of our life. So everything that we read in the Torah, including this parsha, which seems a little bit dry and a little bit technical, everything you could, everywhere you can find tremendous amount of insights and inspiration and most important, practical inspiration that will help us in our journey. So that's by way of introduction. Once we do the introduction, to situate us where we are in the story, the beginning, preparing for the journey. If you're interested in the dates, we are now in the beginning with the second day of Sivan. So Sivan is the month that we got the Torah. The Jewish people came to Sinai yesterday, the 1st of Sivan, and they got the Torah on the 6th of Sivan. Now, how long did they stay at Sinai? So they remained at Sinai. Remember, they came yesterday, which is the 1st of the 3rd month. And they stayed a full year. And we're going to read in 2 portions from now that the day they packed their bags and moved away from Sinai was, if I'm not mistaken, the 20th of the 2nd month. So if they arrived at Sinai, the 1st of the 3rd month, and they leave at the 20th of the 2nd month, that means they're there for almost a full year, 10 days short of a year. So that's just if you want to be grounded with the actual calendar and the actual dates. Okay, so I'm going to read the nutshell, but I give you advance warning. It may be a little technical, so please don't get scared away, because hopefully we can find practical significance in these numbers and in this organization as well. So here we go. Bamidbar, in a nutshell, in the Sinai desert, God says to conduct the census of the 12 tribes of Israel. Moses counts 603,550 men of draftable age, which is 20 to 60 years. The tribe of Levi, numbering 22,300 males, age 1 month and older, is counted separately. So this is a different census. The census of the Jewish people was really for battle. So that's draftable age, that's 20 to 60. But the Levites are counted from 1 month old. The Levites are to serve in the sanctuary. They replace the firstborn, whose numbers they approximated, since they were disqualified when they participated in the worshiping of the golden calf. The 273 firstborn who lacked a Levite to replace them had to pay 5 shekel ransom to redeem themselves. Long story short, in the beginning of our history of our people, the order was supposed to be that the firstborn serve in the temple. Every family has a firstborn. Every family has a representative in the temple. But that plan failed. It failed because the Jewish people, all the Jewish people, including the firstborn, had served the idol when they made the idol at Sinai, the golden calf. And therefore, God transforms the responsibility of serving in the temple from the firstborn, and gives it to the Levites who did not sin with the golden calf. So in this week's parsha, when we count the Levites, you see there was a ceremony where they matched up the firstborn and the Levites. They counted the firstborn and the Levites, sort of to transform the holiness from the firstborn to the Levites. The problem is there are extra firstborn. So here they would so they would have to redeem themselves. In other words, to become a private citizen. So they had to pay 5 shekel coins to the priest, which is related to the mitzvah that we have in the Torah that was supposed to redeem a firstborn born to the Israelite woman. If the father is also an Israelite, not a Kohen, not a priest, not a Levite, or the mother isn't a priest or a Levite, then at 30 days, the firstborn is supposed to be redeemed, and you give the 5 coins to the priest. So that's related to this mitzvah. Okay, when the people broke camp, the 3 Levite clans dismantled and transported the sanctuary and reassembled it at the center of the next encampment. They then erected their own tents around it. The Kahatite, which is the family of Kahat, which is a branch of the family of Levi, who carried the sanctuary's vessels, the ark, the menorah, in their specially designated coverings on their shoulders, camped to its south. The Gershonites, in charge of its tapestries and roof coverings, to its west, and the families of Merari, who transported its wall panels and pillars, to its north. Before the sanctuary's entranceway to the east were the tents of Moses, Aaron, and Aaron's sons. So in other words, you have a camp. The center of the camp is the tabernacle, is the temple. Around the temple, from all three sides, you had the three families of the Levites. And then in the east, the additional side, you had Moses, Aaron, and Aaron's two sons. So the temple is surrounded by Levites. Beyond the Levite circle, the 12 tribes camped in 4 groups of 3 tribes each. So now you have all the 4 corners each has 1 camp. So there are 4 camps. Each camp contains 3 tribes. So you get the total of 12 tribes plus 1 plus Levi. Because as you know, even though there are 12 tribes, but Levites aren't counted because they don't get a portion of the land of Israel. They're designated to serve in the temple, so they're not counted as part of the 12 tribes. Rather, but the tribe of Joseph was split into 2, Manasseh and Ephraim, so you get 12 tribes plus 1. So now we have the amounts. Beyond the Levite circle, the 12 tribes camped in 4 groups of 3 tribes each. To the east were Judah, population 74,000, Issachar 54,000, and Zebulun 57,400. To the south was Reuben, Shimon, and Gad. To the west was Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. To the north, Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. This formation was kept also while traveling. Each tribe had its own Nasi, prince or leader, and its own flag with its tribal color and emblem. So this is interesting that how the Torah gives us a description how they settled, how they made a camp. But then the Torah tells us that same order where the tribes were situated was true not only when they camped, but also when they journeyed through the desert. And as we said, that this is really probably a preparation for their journey through the desert, because that's really the theme of the 4th book, the book of Numbers. So that's the summary. Looks like very technical, but hopefully we'll find some inspiration here as well. In the meantime, comments, questions, jokes, anything you want to share, please share. Otherwise, we begin our journey into the 4th book. I guess pun intended, because the 4th book is about the journey. So that's the pun. We're starting our journey into the book of the journeys. Okay, let's start with the beginning, I guess. We'll start with the verse, and we'll start with Rashi. So we'll be grounded in the verses, and then we can talk and we can go places. Parsha text. Okay, so this is the opening verse, Numbers chapter 1, verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert in the tent of meeting on the 1st day of the 2nd month, in the 2nd year after the exodus from the land of Egypt, saying. So in other words, this is actually 20 days before they would actually leave Sinai. What does God tell Moses? He says as follows, verse 2, take the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel. Literally, raise the head. Raise the head is the biblical way of saying take the census. By families, following their father's houses, a head count of every male according to their number of their names, from 20 years old and upward, all who fit to go out to the army in Israel, you shall count them by their legions, you and Aaron. So now Moshe doesn't have to do it alone. He has assistance of his brother. But not only that, but he also has additional assistance from the leader of each tribe. With you there shall be a man from each tribe, one who is head of his father's house. And then the Torah gives us the list of the leaders of the tribes. These are the names of the men who shall stand with you for Reuben, Elitzur ben Shedeor, for Simon, Shemuel ben Suri Shaddai, etc., etc. It goes through all of the 12 names. And then these are the ones summoned by the congregation, the princes of the tribes of their fathers. They are the heads of the thousands of Israel. And Moshe basically gathers everyone together. And they assemble all the congregation on the first day of the second month, and they declare their pedigrees according to their families, according to their fathers' houses, according to the number of names, a head count of every male from 20 years old and upward. And the Lord commanded Moses, as the Lord commanded Moses, so did he count them in the Sinai desert. Okay, that's the census. And then the next page, we start getting the details, how many tribes and where they counted, where they camped. That's the next page. Okay, so we have a census. So what do we think about a census? So we're going to open Rashi, and Rashi quotes the Medrash, and that will be the starting point for the discussion. Says Rashi, very beautiful Rashi, says Rashi as follows: the Lord spoke in the Sinai desert on the first day of the month. Because they were dear to him, says Rashi, quoting the Medrash, he counted them often. In other words, why are we taking a census? So why do you count people? Okay, so in the United States, it's only once a decade. You have to know how to allocate how much voice to give each state. Okay, fine. So we have a census once a decade. Here, Rashi says, the reason why God counts the people is because God loves the people. Now, when you have something that you love, even if you know the number, you keep counting them. That's what Rashi says, right? You count your diamonds. You know how many diamonds you have. You count your cars. You know how many cars you have. But if you're a car collector, you're going to count them because you love them. Whatever you love, you count. Rashi continues. When they left Egypt, he counted them. Exodus 12:37. When many fell because of the sin of the golden calf, he counted them to know the numbers of survivors. When he came to cause his divine presence to rest among them, he counted them. On the first of Nisan, the Mishkan was erected, and on the first of Iyar, he counted them. So we're talking about a period of 13 months. In 13 months, the Jewish people were counted 3 times. So why the excessive counting? So Rashi's answer is that counting is a symbol of love. When something is precious to you, you continually count them. That's Rashi's point. Why so? So the Hasidic insight goes a little bit deeper and says like this: why is counting a sign of love? So the basic interpretation is if you like something, you count it to know how many you have, or because you cherish it, so you keep counting it. Okay. But the Hasidic interpretation goes a little bit deeper and says, okay, when you count, what are you counting? What does counting do for people when people are counted? So most people don't like to be counted because it means that takes away your own personality if you're just a number. But we're going to go from a different angle. What we're saying is as follows. When you count, in some sense, what that does, it's really an equalizer. When you count, what are you telling the Jewish people? You're telling the Jewish people that every last individual, for the purpose of the census, is just as significant as Moses, is just as significant as Aaron, right? The Jew who is less than important is not less than one. And the Jew who is very important, like Moses or Aaron, doesn't get 2. He's not counted as 2. Everybody is 1. Everybody is counted as 1. So what does that do for me? That explains to the person, what are we counting? We're not counting your achievements. We're not counting how much money you have in the bank. We're not counting how much Torah you understand, right? These are all achievements. They're all external to you. If that's the case, then we have to assign a different number, a different amount for every individual person. But if we're counting everybody as 1, we're counting what the common denominator that everybody has. What does everybody have in common? That God loves. That's the soul. So in some sense, the counting is telling us we're not looking at you as an individual. We're looking at your core essence. At your core essence, you're just as valuable as Moses. Moses is no more valuable than you, and you're no less valuable than Moses. So in that sense, the counting itself, the census itself expresses this truth. When I look at myself and I have to value myself and say, how do I assess myself? So I can assess myself on the basis of external achievement or external talent or my capacity to understand or to feel. That's wonderful. That's true. That's a good, you should do that. And then you hopefully can grow. But you have to understand that's not the core value. That's not what makes you important in the eyes of God. What makes you important in the eyes of God is not how much you achieve or how much you're capable of achieving, but it's the core of who you are. You don't have to do anything to earn it. And that is, in that sense, every person, and in our context, every Jew is counted as one. So that's that expresses the love. It expresses the love, and that's why we count. If you look back and we talk about the Rashi, right, we counted 3 times within 13 months. When does he count them? When the love has to be expressed, right? That's what he says. He says because of their love, he counts them to express the love. That's one point. Okay, very important point. Now we're going to go a little deeper into the concept of a census. And we say we have this issue here because, as we mentioned, the numbers do not highlight and do not draw attention to my individuality, right? The numbers just say, I'm one, you're one. We're counting something that's at the core. We're not looking at the differences between you and somebody else. So it could be done in a negative way where you try to dehumanize somebody. But in this sense, it's the opposite. We're counting the soul. And the soul is, when you talk about the soul, everybody is alike and everybody is significant in the same degree. Okay, but what about my own personality? And this becomes to a very important, this goes to a deeper question. And the deeper question is, when you're trying to create a nation, okay, we have 12 tribes, we have many families. We're really, essentially, it's a tribal society, right? Everything was about the tribes. But you're trying to create a united people. It wasn't so easy. In Jewish history, it wasn't so easy to create a unified people. It didn't happen for hundreds of years until the era of the kings. And that's why the Jews wanted a king, because they felt that the tribes are too fragmented. If you look at the history of the book of Samuel and the book of Judges, when one tribe was attacked, it wasn't so clear that other tribes would send support, would send troops to help. Some tribes did, some tribes didn't. That's why that was one of the motivators for the Jewish people to want a kingdom, to unite us as a coherent people. So this is a tension that you have every time you want to create a nation. Do you want to highlight the differences between people, or do you want to highlight the shared story? And this is a very big problem. And it happened, of course, in the 20th century as well. In Israel, when Jewish people were coming back to Israel from all corners of the earth, with all different types of cultures. And unfortunately, there was not enough of an effort to preserve the individual cultures of the people coming. And a lot of people, certainly in the 50s and 60s, but even later, felt culturally oppressed in the sense that the leadership of the culture in the modern state of Israel sought to create a melting pot, but at the price of moving people away from their own cultural heritage. Because now I am critiquing, but the point here is I understand why they do it. Because if you want to create a nation, you have to have a cohesive story. It's very hard to create a nation if you're just preserving the elements of division within the society. So the question is, what's the right balance? And it seems that what the Torah is doing here is Torah is telling you that you have to find the balance and you have to highlight both. On one hand, we count every individual person. And in that sense, what are we highlighting? That every person is the same. What are we highlighting? We're highlighting the not the uniqueness of each person, but what we all have in common. That's the shared story. We're all members of the Jewish people. We all have a shared story. That's what we're highlighting. Nevertheless, and together with that, we're also counting not just the total of people, but we're actually counting and highlighting the distinction of each tribe. Each tribe has their own semi-story within the overarching story. And not only do we count it, but we highlight it because we put the camps differently and we have a flag for each camp. Now that's very strange. If you're going to battle, you want one flag for everybody to rile around. Not here. Here they're planning on going to battle with under 12 banners, under 12 different flags. Torah emphasizes every tribe needs its own banner. Every tribe needs its own flag. And you say, how come? This is a bad idea if you're trying to create a coherent group. And the answer is no. Judaism has the balance between the uniqueness and the distinctiveness of the individual And yet, together with that, I'm part of a larger group. And to lose one of those stories would be a tragedy. To see myself as part of the collective without my own individual story would be a problem. Would be losing my uniqueness and the story that only I can contribute. On the other hand, to think about just my own contribution and not see myself as part of something larger would also be a tragedy, because then I'm stuck in myself and I'm not connecting to the greater story, and I'm not transcending myself and connecting to something larger than self. So what we're trying to do here with the census of all the Jewish people, yet having a census of each tribe and highlighting the differences between the tribes, we do so by doing both. We count everybody, but we count each tribe. We put each tribe in a distinct place. We preserve the distance. We allow each tribe to have, the commandment is each tribe has their own flag, but it's all part of a greater story. And like I said, this is how I think of myself as an individual. I am my own unique individual, but I'm part of a greater people, a greater story. And I should be able to balance both those stories, both those elements within myself, because to crush one would be a problem. Sometimes you have societies that just highlight the collective. Then you have societies that highlight the individual and erase the collective. It's not about a national collective story. It's just about each person doing their own thing. That's a tragedy as well. So that's the balance that the Torah seems to be setting forth here in the third book. So, beginning of the fourth book. Again, anybody comments, questions are welcome. I want to go a little bit deeper on this theme, then I want to go to the next theme. So give me be gracious to me, give me another few minutes on this theme. But to go a little deeper, we want to go back to Rashi. And Rashi says like this. Says Rashi, this is the Rashi we saw before. Rashi said that because God loves the people, he counts them continuously. He counted them often. When they left Egypt, he counted them. Okay, so that we understand. When many fell because of the sin of the golden calf, he counted them to know the numbers of his survivors. Okay, I get that, fine. When he came to cause his divine presence to rest among them, he counted them. So when they built the temple, they built a Mishkan, they built a tabernacle, and God dwelt amongst the people, that's when God counted them. So far makes sense. The problem is the technicalities that Rashi is going to show in a minute. Seems strange. Excuse me. On the 1st of Nisan, the Mishkan was erected. On the 1st of the first month, the Mishkan was erected. And on the 1st of Iyar, he counted them. What does that mean? He counted them a month late. What's Rashi saying? Rashi says when God wanted to rest his presence amongst the people, that was the third major event, right? They left Egypt. Wonderful. They sinned. We have to express that God loves them even after the sin. So we'll count them after they sin. And then when God wants to show that God is dwelling amongst the Jewish people, they built the tabernacle and God wants to dwell amongst them. Now we're going to, now God will count them again. The problem is, why did he count them a month late? They built a temple the 1st of Nisan, the 1st of month 1. He counts them, like the opening verse of this parsha was the 1st of the second month. Why did he count them a month late? So here's a beautiful commentator. The commentator says like this. Commentary, I should say. Commentary says like this. I forgot who says it. I think that maybe the Kli Yakar says it. I forgot who says it. Who says it? I don't remember. He says, before they built the Mishkan, before they have the tabernacle in the center of their camp, you don't want to highlight the individuality of each tribe, because then they're just going to drift apart. There's nothing binding them. Once we all have a shared project, we're put here together to build a house for God. And we have the house of God in the center of the camp. And we have a center of the camp. We have a mission that unites us. Now, once you have the uniting story, now I could see myself as an individual and sort of say I'm part of an individual tribe with our own individual path. Now it's not dangerous to do that, because at the core, there's a deeper story that unites us. But only when you have the story that unites us could you go and highlight what divides us, right? Society has a big problem. We all want part of one people, but everybody has differences of opinion, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're going to highlight the differences, we're all going to fall apart. So that's why, no, we only highlight the differences once we have a common center, an anchor, and the anchor is the temple. So let's build a temple. That's its own month. Once we highlight that we're all one people, now in the story, I'm different than you. My path is different than you. Different tribes do different things. One tribe was in commerce, one tribe is in agriculture, et cetera, et cetera. You can highlight the differences once there's a shared story. If there's no shared story, it becomes very hard to highlight the differences. Go ahead, Zach, please.
Another possible interpretation that he counted 3 times is the same as you said, that the number was very important to him, and he knew statistics. So when he counts 3 times, he diminishes error almost twice, square root of 3. So
that's very good. That's very good. So you're saying,
and it is random variable. Even if he counts, some Jew can be in the basement or something.
Right, or a guy could be 19 years old and 11 months, or 19 and a half. Right? Or the guy could be 59 or 60, going in, going out. So you're saying,
and the number is so important to him that he would count it 3 times and divide it by 3.
That's good. That's very good. See, I would never ever come up with that interpretation. My training, I would never come up with that interpretation. But if you're
that's all my training is.
Good.
Average.
That's the point here, where we are studying the Torah. We have the common story, but each person comes at it from a different angle, and then you have and then that brings out the deeper dimensions. So I'm glad that we are actually living out what we're preaching. So that's good. Thank you for that. Okay. Did someone else have a question? It could be. I thought I saw someone else. Otherwise, we continue. Okay. Okay. Let's talk a little bit more poetic. Now that we took care of the numbers, we made the mathematicians happy. Now we can talk a little bit more poetry, and let's talk about the name of the book. I always say that the Rebbe taught us that you actually don't have to know too much to be able to think about the parsha, because you think, well, I have to know what the portion tells before I can have an opinion. I had a friend that actually was very opinionated, and he didn't. The fact that he always had an opinion. Even if he wasn't an expert on the topic. So his thing was, we were talking about, a group of friends were sitting and talking. He would show up and he would say, "What's the topic? I have an opinion." Right? Okay, later we find out what the topic is, but I know I have an opinion. So you have to know what the parsha is saying before you can say something on the parsha, but not really, because just knowing the names, just the name of the parsha is already enough to talk. That's what the Rebbe taught us. So there's always a lesson even in the name. So you talk about the name of the 4th book. There's actually, the commentaries explain the name of the 4th book. There's actually a very interesting insights in the fact that there are not one name but 2 names. And these 2 names are not only different names, but they're almost opposing names. So obviously there's some significance. So what do I mean? So you look at the 3rd book, we call it, it looks like Roberta. Roberta, go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi. No, I'm sorry, my audio wasn't working. And I came late, so you might have talked about this, but as far as the counting goes, did you say, do they count children or just adults?
No, they only count. They only count adult males 20 to 60, because what they're really doing is they're counting. Like I mentioned before, we're actually journeying toward Israel, and we're essentially, this is really a counting of a draft for a battle. So it has the spiritual significance, but it also has the practical significance. And the practical significance are, these are the numbers we have that will go to battle. But still, everything we said is still true, because if you're going to count the numbers, you should say, well, we have this amount of soldiers that are healthy, this amount of soldiers that are good for intelligence, etc. But again, no, we're just giving a collective census for the draft. But there is a practical purpose for this draft, and therefore it's specifically 20 to the years 20 to 60. So in that sense, it's not everybody. But when you talk about the mystical side, the mystical side is, okay, so what does counting represent? And again, we're not getting into the details of which group has how many. It's just sort of the general numbers. and there's not much you can do with the general number. If you have 56,000 people in the tribe, but you have no idea how many people know how to hold a gun or how many people could operate machinery, it's not that beneficial in some sense. But on the other hand, this is the starting point for organization.
Okay, but before you said that, I was thinking, but now maybe I'm changing my mind, that counting diamonds, you don't expect the count to change. Counting people, you would think,
Yes.
maybe you have more people, maybe somebody left, maybe somebody
Right.
died, and
Right,
maybe
right.
that's why you would count 3 times,
Right.
because the count changes.
So that seems to be saying what Zach said. In other words, from the perspective, the traditional perspective is that the counting is just more, if the count is to know how many people you have, you don't have to do it so often.
Right.
If you're doing it 3 times in 3 years, there's a deeper, in 3 times in 13 months, there's a deeper message. So you have the practical interpretation Zach offered and you're offering. So I understand. I'm not rejecting that. But especially in the Hebrew, it's very interesting. In Hebrew, the term for census is se'u et rosh, lift up the head. What does lift up the head mean? That's how you say a census in Hebrew. You're lifting up the individual. You're telling the individual, you matter. Not only you matter just like, not more, not less than the guy next to you, right? So there's a lot of talk in Jewish literature about this, is that we're not evaluating you because of your achievement, because of your accomplishment, your physical strength or your intellectual strength. No, when we count you, it's actually telling you that you are, at your core, you're just as worthy as the other person, because everybody is the same, because everybody in the eyes of God, it will basically a spark of God when you get to the core level. So this enough in the language that tells you that counting has a double meaning. It has a practical benefit, but it also has a spiritual benefit. What does it do to the people who are counted? And what does the person do to the person who had a low self-esteem, who didn't think he mattered, or didn't think he mattered as much as the next guy? And that's what we're trying to do here with the census. And then we're saying, well, the general counting highlights that I'm just the same as you. What about my individual contribution? So we say, there's multiple levels. I also have my own tribe, and I have my own flag. Now, a tribe is also big, but the same concept applies to the individualism of every individual. In other words, there's always a balance between, are we highlighting the collective shared aspect to the group, or are we highlighting the individual contribution and importance of every individual? And it's hard to get the balance, and the Torah is insisting that the balance has to be met. I'm part of a larger story. I'm my own person.
Okay, thank you.
And like I said, that every society struggles with this. Some go too far in the collective. I would argue some go a little too far in the individual, and they don't have the cohesive story. I don't want to get political, but at least you could speak generally. In this country, you see that there used to be, perhaps, maybe I'm wrong, but there used to be more of a shared story, a shared values. And now the politics, without getting into any side and without blaming whose problem it is, but it seems like it's getting more polarized. And polarization means that we don't connect to the shared essential story that binds us, as a culture, as a people, as history. So you could do both. And the Torah is telling us that we have to do both, I think. Okay, fine. Then I have to say something that I say it every year, but it's too, what am I talking about? That we'll do next. New for this year. Okay, so we're talking about the poetry a little bit. We're talking about the names. So what's the name of the book and the name of the parsha? Bamidbar, literally in the desert or in the wilderness. And all the commentaries love this parsha. You know why? Because this parsha must occur right before the holiday of Shavuot. And it starts, God spoke to Moses in the mount and in the Sinai desert. Okay, all the rabbis already have a ready-made sermon. You get it? They already have a ready-made sermon because they say, well, we're approaching the holiday of Shavuot. Shavuot, we got the Torah. We got the Torah at Mount Sinai. So let's talk about this, why we got the Torah and why we got it in the desert and what does Sinai represent, and on and on and on. And that's already enough for them to preach. That's enough for them to preach. But why am I saying this? Oh, so that's one name, Bamidbar, in the desert, in the wilderness. And then there is another name, which is closer to the English name, which comes from the Greek name, I guess it comes from the Greek, Latin, and then Greek, but essentially it comes from the Greek name, which is numbers. Now, the name Numbers, it's not just this sort of secular name with a non-Jewish name. In the Torah literature, in the Talmud, the fourth book is referred to as Chumash HaPkudim, the book of the census, or maybe censuses in plural. Pkudim is plural, because there are actually, if you think about it, there's a census in the beginning of the book, and we have a census in the beginning of the book, which is in this parsha, and then 38 years later, at the end of the book, maybe even 39 years later, at the end of the book, at the end of the 40 years before Moses is passing, there's another census. So there's a census when the Jewish people start the journey in the desert, which was supposed to be a very short journey. They were supposed to go right into Israel in a matter of weeks. But because of the sin of the spies, when they decided that they don't want to go, so it was decreed that they stay in the desert for 40 years. So the bottom line is a census in the beginning, is a census in the end. So we refer to the book in the Talmud, much closer to the book of Numbers, Chumash HaPkudim, the book of Numbers, the book of the census. Okay, 2 names. It's very good to have 2 names. I have 2 names. Most of my siblings had 2 names. Why is it good to have 2 names? Most of my children, I think, have 1 name, but my siblings had 2 names because the way we knew we were in trouble is if my mother called us by both names. My mother said, Menachem Mendel, you know you're in trouble. So it's good to have 2 names, but that's only a joke. Why is it good to have that? It's just strange, these 2 names. Why is it strange? Not only because it's different names, but they're opposing names. When you say the word midbar, wilderness, it represents chaos. It represents a place that's not hospitable to people. It's not a place to camp. You don't go camping in the desert. When you say numbers implies organization. Numbers imply order. Numbers imply meaning. Okay, so you're making a system of order, whereas wilderness represents sort of chaos. So we have 2 names that are opposites. And here the Kabbalists step in and they say, yes, they're opposites. Yes, they're extremes, but that essentially is the purpose of the book. If you want to say in short, what is the purpose of this book is, could you travel through the desert, which is a place that is not cultivated and not civilized. So there is no order in the desert. Could you travel through the desert, but travel in an organized fashion, where there's a center to the camp and everybody knows their own space, and you're traveling like in society, which society is the way people organize, but usually society organizes in an urban setting. We don't expect organization in a wilderness setting or in the desert setting. But what the Jewish people are saying is, we're in the desert, we're going to create order in a place where there is no order. So it's not just 2 opposite names, it's the contrast that what we're doing here. We're achieving order in a place of chaos. And then the Kabbalists take it to the next step and they say, you know what? They say, in some sense, that's the story of every Jew. Because yes, we're traveling to the desert. But as we mentioned, the Jewish people traveled through the desert 3,300 years ago. But we're also traveling through the desert because the desert is a spiritual desert, a place that's not necessarily hospitable to the values of holiness and to the values even of humanity. Sometimes we feel like the world is more of a jungle, more of a place that's not hospitable to kindness and holiness. But our job is to travel through the wilderness and create the order, create the meaning. That's what we do historically, but also in a person's individual life. There's 2 ways to live life. You can live life in a very fragmented way where we're being pulled, this chaos. My life is chaos. I have all different responsibilities, sometimes opposing responsibilities, and every moment is isolated, and I'm not living a wholesome life. I don't see the connection between the various activities that I do. Some activities force me to be extroverted. Some activities force me to look inside. And in general, I don't necessarily feel like I'm living a wholesome experience. I feel a lot of fragmentation, especially with the modern world where you have technology, and technology is designed to keep pulling you in all different directions. So that's chaos. That's the wilderness. And our job is to bring numbers, to bring order, to bring meaning to the wilderness. And the way we bring meaning to the wilderness is if we see the deeper story, if we see the deeper purpose of our life, if we see the overarching purpose of our life, then what happens is that every detail of our life is part of a larger story. part of an organized camp, right? If you took a drone and you looked and you zeroed into one Jew sitting in the desert, you don't really see the organization. But if you understand the deeper meaning, the deeper story, we have a tabernacle, we have a temple in the center, and then we have various tribes surrounding it. All of a sudden, you start seeing the inner unity that the different people and different tribes are all part of a greater story. Every aspect of my life is part of my greater purpose, which is to refine myself and refine the world around me. In that case, there's no fragmentation because every detail that I'm doing is part of a larger story. So what I'm doing in my own personal life is exactly what the Jewish people have been doing throughout history and exactly what the Jewish people were doing when they traveled through the desert. Maybe then they did it literally, but that was just a symbol, or it was also a symbol for what we would do. We travel through the desert, the wilderness of our life, and we impose order and meaning, and that creates the unity and the wholesomeness. So that's a beautiful thought, and how that makes it relevant to us, and how we too can seek to find a meaning within and the unity within everything we do. And therefore, we're not living many details, but there's an overarching, unifying story of our own life. And in that sense, we're not being thrown around because every detail is part of something united and something unified. Okay, that's for that. Now we go to the next point, which I say every year, which is too good not to say. So I'm going to say it again, but I'll try to do it under 2 minutes because we say it every year. The next point is also beautiful teaching from the Kli Yakar. And he says like this. He says that we have every person, in other words, generally speaking, there are different values that are considered desirable. And he names 4, but I think we could think about if you to pull out a paper and wrote down the list and write everything you value and everything you want to achieve in your life, it's possible that all those things would fall into one of his 4 groups. It may not, maybe yeah, maybe no. But it seems that I think especially if you think creatively, you can put everything into his 4 groups. What are his 4 groups? So the Kli Yakar says, let's see if I don't forget. If I remember correctly, his 4 groups, he says wisdom. Wisdom is a value. He says good character, what we would call midot, emotional character development. So in other words, being a kind person. Sometimes I meet somebody who's very smart, wonderful, good to go to the lecture, but I would never want to go hang out with the person. The person's a terrible person, right? So you have the value of wisdom. You have the value of good character. Then you have the value of physical health, physical strength and physical health. That would be the 3rd, right? You can be very smart, you can be very kind, but if you have no strength to get out of bed, then okay, so internally you're a good person, but ultimately you can't, it's certainly a value to be healthy and allow you to operate within and influence the world, fine. And finally, the last, maybe some people will put it the first, but the last would be assets, wealth. Wealth is certainly a value in Judaism, nothing wrong with wealth, but it's not the first, it's not even 3rd. If you have a choice to be wealthy or to be unhealthy, or to be healthy and poor, probably most people would choose money, but probably makes more sense to choose health, because what are you going to do with all your wealth if you're stuck in bed? Okay, so these are the values that the general values that the Kli Yakar identifies. So we have wisdom, we have character development, kindness. Another kindness is just one character, but refined character. Then you have, like I said, health, and then you have wealth. Now, the problem with having 4 general categories of values is that sometimes, almost always, these values compete, right? If I spend more time in the gym, I'm trying to achieve the 3rd value, I may not have enough time to spend in the library trying to achieve the wisdom. And if I spend too much time in the library, maybe I'll have wisdom, but I won't have money. I won't spend enough time earning a living. So these values, it's nice that they're all that I think we all value all of them. And like I said, if we had time, we would go around the table and say, ask other people to suggest what they value, and perhaps it would fit into one of these categories. But the bottom line is, at least these 4 general categories would sometimes compete and maybe cancel. In other words, compete for my attention and my time. So how do I what's the healthy balance of these values? So what the Kli Yakar says, and he said it's very creative. He says like this. He says, if you look at the 4 camps that the Jewish people have in the desert, each camp, each 3 tribes represents one of these values. In other words, what the 3 have in common. Then you have the individual tribe, individual value of every single person, but of every tribe. In other words, each of the 3 tribes. But generally speaking, each camp had 3 tribes excels in one of those areas. And if we had time, we would go. We don't have time. I have to conclude a few minutes early, unfortunately, today. But if we go through it, we would see that the first one, Judah and his clan and the other 2 tribes that with him represents wisdom. The next one represents emotional development, good character. The next one represents physical strength. And finally, the last one represents wealth. Now, what's happening here is that, is there a hierarchy when you're actually a circle? In other words, it's not linear. They didn't travel linear. They had a temple in the center, and then you have those four camps around the temple. So yes, they traveled. There was a first. The first one was Judah, the tribe of Judah. So there was a first. They did travel in order, but the order is not direct line. The order is around the temple. So the temple is the core. The temple is their inner core. So what the Kli Yakar seems to be saying is, on one hand, there is a hierarchy. Wisdom is greater than the character is, I don't know if greater. First, you have to have wisdom, which will help you develop your character, which will help you, and then you need the strength to implement it in the world. And in addition to strength, you also need assets. So these are the 4 things. But in some sense, even though there is an order, if you talk about the core is the temple. Each of them are as close to the temple as the other one. In other words, the wealth is not number 4. The wealth is just, if you took a measuring tape, the wealth, which is the lowest, is actually just as close to the temple, which is the core of the camp, as wisdom, because we have a center and we have all 4 camps around it. So what does that indicate? That indicates that these values are important to the extent that they're an extension from the essence, from the core. The core is a relationship with God. To have a relationship with God, you need all 4. So all 4 are, in some sense, there's a hierarchy of which one is more important. But if you talk about my underlying value is the connection to holiness, and those 4 become tools for me to implement my inner essence, which is the connection to God, then when I'm earning a living, I'm not any further to God than when I'm studying the Torah, right? Because if the purpose is the temple in the center, then if my trying to earn assets and earn wealth is an extension of the core, the middle, then whatever I'm doing, I'm just as close to the core, because whatever I'm doing is motivated by the same inner motivation. And when that happens, there's less of a conflict between the 2. Because how much time should I spend in the library? How much time should I spend in this gym? How much time should I spend at work? How do I evaluate this? Well, every person is different depending on my connection to the core, to the temple. What is my spiritual purpose? What is my spiritual mission? And depending on that, now I see how those 4 camps spread from my personal spiritual purpose. But then these values are no longer competing, because there's an anchor in the center, and the anchor is the connection to holiness. So when you have that spiritual anchor, then no matter which direction you go, no matter which value you're pursuing, you're just as close to the center, because those 4 values are not the goal. It's not the end. I don't want money for money. I don't want even health for health. I want health so I can do my spiritual mission. Same with wisdom. Same with character development. So that's a beautiful way of thinking about how this parsha, which spends so much time about the temple in the center and how the Jewish people form around the temple, even though it was just temporary. Why are we spending so much time talking about that order, which the Jewish people just did it once when they traveled through the desert, those 39 or 40 years. But for most of Jewish history, this is not relevant. So why is it written in the Torah? But according to the mystical interpretation laid out by the Kli Yakar, it's relevant to each of us, because it's telling us how do we organize our values, and how to organize each of our values and each of our desires and the things we need. And we genuinely need these things. But if they're expressions of your inner core. And then you have the hierarchy. This is more spiritual. This is less spiritual. pursuing your health is less spiritual in some sense than wisdom. Pursuing wealth is certainly less spiritual than wisdom. But if you put the temple in the core and your spiritual connection to God in the core, and then these 4 values are ways of expressing your spiritual mission, now wherever you are, you're just as close to the temple. So I personally think this is a beautiful idea. Every year I say, I'm not going to say it, I say it last year, but I end up saying it because it's so beautiful. Now, if we had extra time, we would talk, but that one I'm going to say for next year. Unfortunately, I have to leave 2 minutes early. So I apologize for that, but thank you for beginning the journey of the 4th book. And I know this week was all numbers, was all technical, but before you know it, in 2 weeks, the drama begins, and then you have crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis, like the Jews know how to create. And then that's where the drama begins, because a lot of the growth that happens in response and how to deal, when we see how to deal with great challenges. So thank you all for joining. Wonderful day. Get ready, happy Shabbos and happy Shavuot, which is the time that we recommit to studying the Torah, because we got the Torah on this day, on Sunday and Monday. 3,334 years ago, if I got my numbers right. I may be off 1 year, but I don't think I am. Okay, thank you very much, and we should see each other in good health.
Oh, mine.
Thank you.